The fist hit the door 3 times hard enough to rattle the latch, and Caleb Whitmore came off his chair with the rifle already in his hands. "Whoever you are, you got 5 seconds to walk away." "I can't." A woman's voice, cracked, frozen through. 4. "Please." 3. "I came because my father knew you were alone." The rifle stopped moving. Caleb stood there in the dark of his own house, 8 years of silence sitting on his shoulders, and felt something crack open in his chest that he had spent every one of those years nailing shut. He opened the door, and the girl standing on his step said the one name in the world that could bring him to his knees. Before we go on, if stories like this one mean something to you, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end. And do me one favor, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. "James Bennett," she said. "My father was James Bennett." Caleb Whitmore did not move. He had heard that name maybe 4 times out loud in 20 years, and every single time it had been his own voice saying it alone in a room with nobody in it. "Say it again." "James Bennett." "Louder." "James—" Her teeth were chattering so hard the word came apart in the middle. "James Bennett. He was my father. He said if I ever had nowhere left I should come to you." "Then he lied to you," Caleb said. And he started to close the door. He got it maybe halfway before her hand came up and caught the edge of it. Not hard. She didn't have hard left in her. It was the weight of a bird landing on a fence rail, and it stopped him more completely than a loaded gun would have. "Mr. Whitmore." Her breath was coming in little white shreds. "I have walked 11 miles today. I have been on the road since the 2nd week of October. I am not asking you to take me in." "Then what are you asking?" "To stand somewhere that isn't the wind, for 1 hour, and then I'll go." "Go where?" "That's not your problem." Caleb looked at her. That was the thing he would think about years later, when he was an old man with grandchildren climbing on him, that the first real thing he ever knew about Clara Bennett he learned in the first 90 seconds. She had nothing. She had walked 11 miles to a stranger's door. And she still said, "That's not your problem," like a woman throwing the last coin in her pocket into a river just to prove she could. He stepped back from the doorway. "Get in here before you die on my porch and I have to explain it to somebody." She came in the way an animal comes into a barn, not trusting it, measuring the door behind her. She was carrying a suitcase that had been a good suitcase once, maybe 15 years ago, and now had a rope around it because the latch had given up. Her coat was a man's coat. The sleeves were rolled 4 times. "Sit." "I'd rather stand." "You'd rather stand," Caleb repeated. "If I sit down, Mr. Whitmore, I don't believe I'm getting back up, and I'd like to leave under my own power." He put a cup in front of her anyway. Coffee that had been on the stove since noon and tasted like a blacksmith's apron. She drank it like it was communion. "What's your name?" "Clara." "Clara Bennett." "Yes." "How old are you?" 29. Caleb did the arithmetic in his head, and the arithmetic hurt. 29. Which meant that when James Bennett had pulled a half-dead 19-year-old boy out of a snowbank on the north face of Cutter's Ridge and carried him 1.5 miles on his back and sat beside him all night talking nonsense into his ear so he wouldn't slip under, this girl had not even existed yet. She'd come later. She'd come into a world where Caleb Whitmore had already been saved and had already walked away and had already gotten busy with the long, important business of forgetting. "Where's your father now?" She set the cup down, and Caleb knew. He knew before she said a word from the way her hands went flat on the table, both of them palms down like a woman steadying a boat. "He passed." "When?" "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." "Why?" And that was the first time she looked at him. Really looked. Up out of the coat collar straight into his face, and there was nothing meek in it at all. "Because," Caleb said slowly, "that man is the only reason I am standing in this room." "I know," Clara said. He told me every year of my life." Here is what she gave him then. She untied the rope. She opened the suitcase on his floor, and Caleb saw the whole of her life in it. 2 dresses, a hairbrush, a tin cup, a Bible with a broken spine, and a bundle of paper tied in string, and she took out one envelope and held it out to him. He didn't take it. What is it? A letter. From who? You know from who. What's it say? Read it and find out. I asked you what it says. His voice came out harder than he intended, and he watched her flinch, and he hated himself for a half-second, and then let the hate go the way he let everything go. Because I'll tell you what I think it says. I think it says money. I think your daddy told you about a man out west who owes him something, and you've come to collect, and I'd rather you just say it out loud like an honest woman than make me read it in his handwriting. The silence after that was a long one. Then Clara Bennett picked the letter up off the table, walked 4 steps to the fireplace, and held it over the flame. Don't? Why not? She said. You've already decided what's in it. Clara, you don't know me, she said, so you've decided I'm a beggar. That's fine. Everybody I've met for 400 miles decided I was a beggar, but you don't get to decide it about him. The paper was starting to curl. Caleb crossed that room faster than he had moved in 8 years and took it out of her hand. They stood there, the 2 of them, close enough that he could see she was crying and not making any sound about it at all, which is a thing people only learn to do when they have had to cry somewhere they were not allowed to. Sit down, he said. Please. She sat down. He didn't open it, not yet. He put it on the table and put his hand flat on top of it like it might get up and leave. Tell me how he died. Slow, she said. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. It took 2 years. It started in his chest and it ended everywhere. At the end, he didn't know the seasons anymore. He'd ask me if the plow was in February. He'd ask me to bring his father in from the field, and his father had been dead 40 years. Was there a doctor? There was a doctor for the first 8 months. And after that there was me, Clara said. Caleb's hand tightened on the letter. He had a farm. She went on, and her voice had gone flat and quick the way people talk when they've told a story so many times it's worn smooth and can't cut them anymore. 90 acres outside of Hollis, Missouri. He had it free and clear when I was a girl. Then he had it with a note on it. Then he had it with 2 notes on it. Doctors are expensive, Mr. Whitmore. Dying is expensive. Nobody tells you that. Everybody tells you it's free. Who holds the notes? Nobody now. They sold it in April. There was a man there when they carried the furniture out who told me I ought to be grateful they let me keep my mother's brush. Caleb stared at the table. He had 90 acres. He had 90 acres. And nobody helped him. People helped, Clara said. People brought food. The Kesslers plowed our lower field 2 springs running and never took $1. Don't you make my town into villains. They were good to us right up until good wasn't enough. That's what happens. Good runs out. It's not anybody's fault. It just runs out. And Caleb heard himself say very quietly, he should have written to me. Clara Bennett went absolutely still. Mr. Whitmore, she said. He did. Urag. The fire made a noise. Nothing else did. No, Caleb said. 1879, 1881, 1883 twice, once in the spring, once at Christmas. I know because I posted 3 of them myself. I walked them to Hollis and I paid for the stamps out of egg money. No. The last one I wrote out for him because his hands had gone. He dictated it and I wrote it, and he made me read it back twice to be sure I hadn't softened it. No. He said, Caleb, I am not too proud to ask. He made me write that. He said, I have never asked you for one thing in 20 years, and I am asking now. Caleb was on his feet. He didn't remember standing up. That was the honest truth of it. He'd gone from sitting to standing with nothing in between, and his chair was over on the floor behind him, and his heart was going like a hammer on a rail. I never got them, he said. Then somebody in Red Hollow has been eating your mail for 6 years. I never got them. And then he stopped. Because he did remember. Not the letters. He remembered the year. He remembered 1879, and he remembered what 1879 was in this house, and he remembered a wooden box on the shelf by the door where Sarah used to put the post when she came back from town, and he remembered that after Sarah went into the ground in the November of that year, Caleb Whitmore had not opened that box again. Not once. He had put things in it. He had never taken anything out. 2-3 years later, somebody's boy had come up the trail with a sack, and Caleb had told him to leave it on the porch, and the boy had left it on the porch, and Caleb had walked past it for a week, and then he had taken the whole thing, the box and the sack, and all of it out to the burn barrel behind the smokehouse, because it was easier than looking at Sarah's handwriting on the outside of a grocer's account. He had burned them. He had burned that man's hand reaching out to him. 4 times. He had burned it 4 times without ever once looking at it, because looking at anything at all had been more than he could do. Clara was watching his face. "You did get them," she said. "Clara, you got them and you didn't answer. It wasn't—" He waited. Her voice broke wide open for the first time. "Do you understand me?" He waited. "Every time the post came for 6 years, that man asked me anything from Wyoming every time, sick as he was. Anything from Wyoming, Clara. And I'd say no. Papa, not today. And he'd nod and he'd say, well, he's a busy man, and then he'd look out the window for a while." Stop. "And I hated you." She was standing now too. She was 5'4", and she was starving, and she came at him across that table with nothing but her voice. And Caleb Whitmore took a step back from her. "I have hated you since I was 23 years old. I used to lie in bed and think of what I'd say to you if I ever saw your face. And then he'd wake up in the night and call me over and tell me the story again about the boy in the snow, about how he carried you, about how you gripped his hand so hard you left marks, and he'd smile, Mr. Whitmore. He'd smile. Because it was the best thing he ever did in his whole life, and he never once regretted it, not even at the end, not even when he was dying poor in a house they were about to take. Stop it. He wasn't angry at you, I was angry at you. And then he made me promise—" She stopped. She had gone too far, and she knew it, and Caleb saw her know it. "Made you promise what?" "Nothing." "Made you promise what, Clara?" "It's in the letter," she said. "Read the letter." He read the letter. It took him a long time, and not because it was long. Caleb. "You will not remember my hand, but you will remember my name. I have thought a good deal about whether to write this, and I have decided that a man who has spent his life being too proud to ask should not die that way in front of his daughter. I am not going to tell you about my situation. If I tell you, then this is a letter asking for money, and I would rather be buried in a borrowed coat than have you think that of me. So I will tell you the other thing. I have a daughter. Her name is Clara. She is the best of everything I have ever had a hand in. She has spent 5 years of her young life carrying a sick man to bed and lying to him about the weather, and when I go, there will not be one single person left in this world whose first thought in the morning is Clara Bennett. I know what that is. I know what that does to a person. I found you in the snow 20 years ago, and the thing I remember is not that you were cold. It is that when you came to, you looked around and you understood that nobody was coming for you. I have never forgotten your face when you understood that. I have seen it on my daughter's face twice this year. Caleb, my daughter has lost everything. If there is one person in this world who understands what it means to be alone, it is you. Please don't let her face this world by herself. J. Bennett. Caleb read it twice. Then he set it down on the table, and he sat down in the chair he had picked up off the floor, and he put both hands over his face, and for a long, long moment, the only man for 9 miles in any direction did not make a single sound. When he took his hands away, his voice came out like gravel. Why'd you wait? What? He signed it J. Bennett. He was dying when he wrote this. You said he died 2 years after it started. Caleb looked up. When did he die? Clara. March. March of what year? She didn't answer. March of what year? 1884, Clara Bennett said. 2 years. 2 years she had carried that letter. Caleb sat with that, and the size of it kept growing on him, the way a thing does when your mind won't stop turning it. 2 years, he said. You had this in your hand for 2 years, and you didn't come. No. Why not? Because I didn't need you, she said. I had work. I had a room over a dry goods store in Hollis, and I kept books for Mr. Ambrose, and I was fine, Mr. Whitmore. I was fine for 2 years, and I would have been fine for 40 more. What happened? Mr. Ambrose died, and his son didn't want a woman keeping his books. She said it without any heat at all, which somehow made it worse. He said it looked improper. He said people talked. He gave me $11 and a very nice reference that no one in that county would honor. And then his wife came to see me privately and told me it would be better for everyone if I found somewhere else to live, because her husband was a weak man, and I was, she said, a temptation to weak men. Caleb's jaw went tight. I was 32 hours from the poorhouse, Clara said. That's not a figure of speech. I had counted it. And I sat on the edge of a bed I no longer had the right to sleep in, and I took out my father's letter, and I hated him for writing it, and I hated you for existing, and then I got on a wagon. Clara, I want you to understand something. She leaned forward. I did not come here because I believe in that letter. I don't. I think my father was a dying man having a beautiful dream. I came here because a woman alone with $11 gets to choose between one bad road and another bad road, and this was the only road with a name on it. Caleb was quiet. Then he said, That's the most honest thing anybody said in this house in 8 years. Then I'll say another one. She stood up, sat back down immediately because her legs went, and Caleb saw the exact moment her body simply resigned from the argument, and she gripped the table and breathed through it, and refused, absolutely refused, to look away from him while it happened. I'm not staying. You can't walk out of here tonight. I'll go at first light. To where, Clara? Red Hollow. There's a hotel. Hotels need somebody to do the linens. There's no hotel. There's a boarding house run by a man named Pike, who I would not let hold my hat. Then I'll go on to Cheyenne. That's 190 miles. Then I'll go 190 miles, she shouted, and her voice cracked in the middle of it, and she slammed her palm down on the table hard enough to jump the coffee cup. And Caleb Whitmore, a man who had not raised his voice, laughed, wept, or argued with a living soul. Since 1879, felt his whole chest go hot. You'll go 190 miles, he said. With $11. $4. $4. I said I'd walk. I didn't say it'd be pretty. And Caleb started to laugh. He hadn't meant to. It came up out of him like something breaking loose in a chimney, ugly and rusted and startled. And Clara Bennett stared at him like he'd lost his mind. What? She said. What? You, Caleb said. God Almighty, you're him. You're exactly him. He was face down in a ravine with his own blood in his beard, and he told me to quit sniveling because we had 1.5 miles to go. Clara's mouth did something complicated. He never told me that part. He wouldn't have. Why not? Because he was the only man I ever met, Caleb said, who thought the worst thing you could do to a person was let them owe you. He gave her the back room. It had been Sarah's sewing room. He had not opened the door in 8 years, and when he did, the hinges screamed, and Clara said quietly from behind him, Mr. Whitmore, I can sleep in the barn. Don't, he said. I'm only saying, don't, he said again, and something in it stopped her. He got a fire going in there, and he took the sheets off the bed and shook 8 years out of them and put them back on, and the whole time he did it, he could feel her standing in the doorway, watching him with an expression he could not read at all. There, he said. It's a bed. It's not charity. It's a bed. In the morning, we'll figure out what's what. There's nothing to figure. I'll go. Clara. Mr. Whitmore. Caleb. She stopped. You've been in my house 4 hours, he said. You've called me Mr. Whitmore 30 times. You can stop. She looked at him for a while. Caleb, she said. There. Now go to sleep. He got to the door. Caleb. He turned around. Your wife, Clara said. Sarah. Everything in the room got very cold and very still. Don't, Caleb said. He knew her name, Clara said. He knew you married a woman named Sarah in 1874, and he knew she was gone by the end of 79. He read it in a letter from a man named Ott, who knew a man in Red Hollow. He never told you he knew. He never wrote you about it because he said, and here her voice went to nothing. He said a man like that would rather be left alone with it, and the kindest thing you can do for a man like that is not make him say it out loud. Caleb stood in the doorway with his hand on the frame. He was right, he said. Was he? Good night, Clara. Was he right, Caleb? And Caleb Whitmore said, no, and closed the door. Tuck. He did not sleep. He sat in his chair by the fire with his dead friend's letter on his knee and did the accounting of his own life, and it did not come out well. He had 1,900 acres. He had 140 head. He had, and this was the number that got him. This was the number that sat on his chest like a hand. He had $1,160 in a bank in Cheyenne that he had not touched in 4 years, because there was nothing on God's earth he wanted to buy. $1,160. And James Bennett had died in a house they took with a daughter lying to him about the weather. 4 times that man had written. 4 times. And Caleb had burned it because looking at the world was too hard, and he had called that grief. And everybody in Red Hollow had called it grief. And grief had been a very comfortable room to live in for 8 years. And here was the bill. Around 3 in the morning, he said out loud to nobody, I'm sorry, Jim. And the house didn't answer, because houses don't. He was up at 5. She was up at 4. That was the thing that undid him. He came out to the kitchen expecting to have to knock on that door and coax a sick woman out of a bed. And there was a fire in the stove, and there was coffee that did not taste like an apron. And the door was standing open, and out in the dark, he could hear his own barn making noises it had not made in 8 years. He went out. Clara Bennett was in his barn, in her father's coat throwing hay. What are you doing? Feeding your horses. You don't know my horses. I know they were hungry, she said, and threw another fork of it. That bay's got a stone bruise on the near fore. He's been favoring it long enough it's changed how he stands. And there's a rat's nest the size of a hat in your feed bin, which is why you're losing meal in case you'd wondered. Caleb stood there. You've been out here an hour. 2. You near froze to death last night, and now I'm warm, Clara said, because I've been throwing hay for 2 hours. She stopped, leaned on the fork, looked at him. I told you I'm not a beggar. You didn't believe me. Fine. I don't argue with people, Caleb. I just wait. Wait for what? For them to run out of reasons. And Caleb Whitmore, 38 years old, hard as a fence post, a man who had not needed one solitary thing from one solitary soul since the day they put Sarah in the ground, heard himself say, stay through the winter. She went very still. That's charity. It's wages, he said. $8 a month, and you're bored same as I'd pay a hand, and you'll earn it because I'm behind on everything, and I've got a fence on the south line that's been down since August, and I'm not too proud to say I can't get to it alone. You've been alone 8 years. Yeah, Caleb said, and look how it's going. Clara Bennett laughed. It surprised them both. It came out of her like a cough, like something she'd forgotten the mechanism of, and she put her hand over her mouth immediately as if to catch it and put it back. $8, she said. $8. 9. Caleb stared at her. You're negotiating. You said I'd earn it. If I'm earning it, I'll earn 9. Your father, Caleb said, was exactly like this, and it is the single most aggravating quality a human being can have. $9. $9. Fine. God help me. She put her hand out. He looked at it. Then he took it, and her hand was small and cold, and had the palm of a woman who had done 400 miles of somebody else's work, and Caleb Whitmore shook it once hard like a deal between men. Through the winter, he said. Through the winter. she said. It lasted 3 days. 3 days of the ranch making noise again, of 2 cups on the table of the dog that had ignored every human being alive for 6 years, lying across her feet like a rug of Caleb, coming in from the north pasture, and hearing somebody singing in his kitchen, and stopping in the yard with his hand on the door because he could not make himself go in and interrupt it. 3 days. On the 4th day, a rider came up the trail. Caleb watched him come. Clara came out and stood on the step and watched too, and Caleb said without looking at her, "Go inside." Why? Because that's Harrington's man. Who's Harrington? Go inside, Clara. She did not go inside. The rider was young and clean and had a good coat, and he did not get down off his horse, which told Caleb everything. Whitmore. Belle, Mrs. Harrington sends her regards. The young man's eyes went past Caleb and landed on Clara and stayed there about 2 seconds too long. And her congratulations. On what? On the household. A smile. Word gets around. Word gets around in 4 days. Word gets around in 4 hours, Whitmore, this is Wyoming. He shifted in the saddle. She wanted me to say she's raised her offer. 9,000 for the ranch and the water rights. That's 1,000 more than March, and it's the last time she raises it. Tell her no. She thought you'd say that. Belle's smile got wider. She also said to tell you that a man's circumstances can change awful fast. And when they change, sometimes a man wishes he'd taken 9. That sounds like a threat, Belle. It's a courtesy, Whitmore. He turned the horse. And then he stopped, and he looked at Clara again, and he said pleasantly, "Ma'am, you're the Bennett girl." Caleb felt the ground move under him. Clara didn't blink. I am. Come a long way. I have. All the way from Missouri, Belle said. Hollis, Missouri. That's a fair piece. And Clara Bennett's face did not change at all. But Caleb was standing close enough to see her hand down at her side close into a fist so tight the knuckles went white. Give Mrs. Harrington my regards, Caleb said. Belle touched his hat and rode away. Caleb turned around. How does he know where you're from? I don't know. Clara. I don't know. You've been in this territory 4 days, and a man who works for the richest woman in the county rides 9 miles to tell me the name of the town you came from, and you don't know. Caleb. What aren't you telling me? And she said nothing. She stood there on his step in her dead father's coat, and she said absolutely nothing. And Caleb Whitmore watched a thing move behind her eyes that he had not seen there before. Not pride, not grief, not that iron stubbornness he'd already learned to recognize. Fear. For the first time since she'd hit his door, Clara Bennett was afraid. Go inside, he said quietly. She went inside. That night, he couldn't stand it. He got the letter out again. He'd read it 11 times by then, he could have recited it, and he read it once more by the fire, looking for the thing he'd missed. Because there was a thing he'd missed. He could feel it, the way you feel a splinter you can't find. And he found it. It was so small, Caleb. My daughter has lost everything. If there is one person in this world who understands what it means to be alone, it is you. Please don't let her face this world by herself. He read that line 4 times. Then he looked at the line above it, and the line above that. And he took the paper over to the lamp and turned it in the light, and he sat down very slowly because his legs had stopped being reliable. The ink was different, not much, a shade. The whole letter was one color, a brown-black, old faded, even right up until Caleb, my daughter has lost everything. And the last 3 lines were blacker, and the hand was smaller, and the letters leaned the other way. Caleb Whitmore sat in his chair for a long minute with his heart going somewhere it had no business going. Then he stood up, and he walked to the back room, and he knocked once, and opened the door without waiting. Clara was sitting on the edge of the bed with her boots still on. She hadn't been sleeping either. He held the letter out. His hand was shaking. He hated that his hand was shaking. He didn't write this. Clara looked at the letter, then at him. He wrote most of it, she said. Clara, he wrote all of it, but the end. Her voice was very calm and very small. He got to, I have a daughter, her name is Clara, and it took him 4 days, and then he had a bad night, and after that he never held a pen again. Then who? I did. The room went so quiet, Caleb could hear the fire 2 rooms away. He died in March, Clara said. And the letter sat in a drawer for 11 months and it was unfinished. Caleb, it just stopped. It stopped in the middle like he did. And one night in February, I got it out and I read it, and I understood that he never asked you. He wrote 4 letters, and he never once asked you. Not for money, not for help, not for anything. Her eyes were streaming, and her voice never moved off that flat, terrible calm. He was too proud, and he died of it, and I watched. Clara. So I finished it. She looked straight at him. I sat at his table and I picked up his pen and I wrote the 3 lines he was too good a man to write, and I signed his name to them, and then I carried it for 2 years because I couldn't decide if it was a letter or a forgery. Caleb couldn't speak. That's what I've done, Clara Bennett said. I put words in a dead man's mouth to buy myself a roof. So now you know exactly what kind of woman is sleeping in your house, and I'll be gone by morning and you can burn that one too. Caleb Whitmore looked at the letter in his hand for a long time. Then he folded it along the creases it already had, and he put it in his shirt pocket, and he said, "Take your boots off." Clara blinked. What? Your boots. Take them off. You've been sitting there 4 hours with your boots on waiting to be thrown out, and I'm telling you to take them off because you're not going anywhere tonight, and I'm too tired to argue about it. Did you hear what I said to you? I heard every word. I forged a dead man's hand. I heard you. I put a beg in his mouth. He'd have gone to the grave before he wrote those lines, and I wrote them, and I signed him to them, and I carried it up your road like it was gospel. Clara. And you sat in that chair and you cried over words that came out of me. Clara. She stopped. Caleb rubbed his hand down his face. He looked in that moment older than 38 by a considerable margin. You want to know what I did with your father's letters, he said. The real ones, the 4 he wrote with his own hand. You said you never got them. I lied, Caleb said. Not on purpose. I lied to myself first, and then it came out of my mouth the same way it went in. He sat down on the chair by the door heavy like a man setting down something he'd carried a long way. There was a box by my door. Sarah put the post in it. After she went, I stopped opening it. Then the boy from town started leaving the sack on the porch, and I'd walk past the sack. And one day I took the whole business out to the burn barrel, and I lit it, and I stood there and watched it, and I felt nothing, Clara. That's the part I want you to hear. I felt relieved. Clara's mouth had come open a little. So you tell me you put 3 sentences in his mouth, Caleb said. All right. I burned 4 letters he wrote with his own 2 hands while he was dying. You forged him a voice. I set his real one on fire. He looked up. Which one of us do you figure ought to be walking out that door in the morning? The silence went on so long the fire had time to shift. That's not the same, Clara said, but there was nothing behind it. No, Caleb agreed. It's worse. Take your boots off. She took her boots off. He got as far as the doorway, and her voice came at his back small and furious and about 11 years old. I'm not sorry. He stopped. I want to be, Clara said. I've wanted to be sorry for 2 years, but every time I get close to it, I remember him asking me if there was anything from Wyoming, and I stop being sorry. So don't you forgive me, Caleb Whitmore. Don't you dare. I didn't come here to be forgiven. I came here because I ran out of road. Caleb thought about that. Then don't be sorry, he said. Be here at 5. She was there at 4. That was how the winter started. And the winter was the strangest thing that had ever happened to Caleb Whitmore. And the strangest part of it was how fast it stopped being strange. By the end of the first week, she had rebuilt his feed bin on the grounds that a man losing a quarter of his meal to rats was a man paying rats a wage. By the end of the second, she had gone through the tack room and laid out every piece of leather he owned on the floor and told him flatly that 9 bridles were past saving, and he'd been riding on faith. By the end of the third, she'd found the account books. He hadn't hidden them. That was the thing. They were in a crate under the window where they'd been since 1879, and he walked past that crate 11 times a day and had not opened it since the fall. Sarah died, and the reason was so stupid he'd never said it out loud to anybody. The last 8 pages were in her handwriting. Clara opened it on a Tuesday. He came in at dark, and she was sitting at his table with every ledger he'd ever owned stacked up in front of her, and a pencil behind her ear, and a look on her face like a woman watching a house burn. "Sit down," she said. "I've been out in—" "Sit down, Caleb." He sat. "How much do you pay Dover for feed?" "60 a ton." "You pay 68? "No, I pay 60. We shook on 60 in 82. "You shook on 60 in 82, Clara said. "And you've been billed 68 since the spring of 83, and you've paid it 31 times without once looking at the paper because the paper comes in an envelope and you don't open envelopes." She turned the ledger around. "Right there, and there, and there." Caleb looked at the numbers. "That's how much is that?" $248. Something went cold in his stomach. "Say that again." $248, and I've only got through 84. I haven't started on 85. She flipped a page. "And it's not just Dover. Your buyer's been docking you 11 cents a hundredweight for shrink, which is fine. Everybody docks for shrink, except he's docking you at the scale and on the settlement, so you're paying it twice. That's another 60 a year. And your salt bill—" "Stop. Your salt bill is—" "Stop." She stopped. Caleb sat there with his hands flat on the table and did the arithmetic that he had spent 8 years refusing to do, and it came out around $400. And $400 was more than James Bennett had needed in any one year of his dying. $400, he said. Nearer 5. $500? "Caleb, do you know what $500 is?" His voice came up and he didn't stop it. "It's a doctor for 8 months. It's a note paid off. It's a man dying in his own house instead of somebody else's." "Don't do that." "He wrote me 4 times. Don't you dare do that." Clara stood up so fast the chair went over. "You don't get to use my father as a whip. You want to flog yourself. You go out to the barn and do it, but you will not sit at my table and turn him into a stick you hit yourself with, because he wasn't that. He was a man who laughed. He was a man who couldn't sing and did it anyway. He is not your penance." Caleb stared at her. "My table," he said. Clara went scarlet to her hairline. And then, and this was the thing he'd remember, this was the thing that got in under the door, she didn't take it back. "I've been sitting at it 11 hours a day for 3 weeks, she said. "It's a little bit my table." Caleb Whitmore laughed for the second time in 8 years. Then he said, "Write to Dover." "What do I say?" "Say the 68 stops today, and say I want the 8 back, all 31 times of it, and say if he'd like to discuss it he can write out here and discuss it with me personally." "He won't pay it." "He'll pay it." "Caleb, I've kept books for 9 years, and I'm telling you a man who's been quietly skimming you for 3 years does not fold on the first letter." "He'll pay it," Caleb said, "because you're going to write the letter and I've read your handwriting." Dover paid it in 11 days. He rode out personally, and he sat on his horse in the yard and would not come in, and he handed Caleb a bank draft for $248 with a face on him like a man passing a kidney stone. And the last thing he said before he left was, "Whitmore, who is she?" "She's my bookkeeper." "Where'd you get her, Missouri?" "Well, Dover said send her back." Clara was standing in the doorway when he rode off. She'd heard all of it. "He'll tell everybody," she said. "Yep. He'll tell it his way." "Yep. You know what his way is." "I know exactly what his way is," Caleb said, and he handed her the draft. $248, and it took you 3 weeks and 1 letter. Buy yourself a coat that fits. She didn't take it. "I don't want a coat." "Clara, I want the fence," she said. "The south line. You said it's been down since August. You said it every day for 3 weeks like it was a thing you were going to get to, and you're not going to get to it because you can't do a two-man fence alone, and there's 400 head of Harrington cattle sitting on the other side of it waiting for you to be tired." She looked at him. "By wire." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "You've been thinking about my fence." "I've been thinking about your fence since the day I got here," Clara said, "because I walked past it on the way in. 11 miles, Caleb. You think I wasn't reading? They put the south line back up in 9 days in weather that had no business allowing it. And somewhere in those 9 days, he could never afterward find the exact hour of it which bothered him, because Caleb Whitmore was a man who liked to know when a thing had happened to him, the ranch stopped being a place where he was waiting to die. It came apart in small pieces. The dog first. That dog had bitten 2 men and ignored the rest of the species since 1880, and it took Clara Bennett 11 days to have it sleeping across her feet, and when Caleb said something about it, she said, "I don't ask him for anything. That's all it is. Everybody who ever came up your road wanted something off him." Then she'd looked up. "Same as you." The singing second. She sang in the kitchen, and she sang badly, and she stopped the second she heard his boot on the step every time for 2 months, until the day he stood out in the cold, rather than make her stop. And she came out and found him standing there and said, "How long have you been out here?" And he said, "Little while." And Clara Bennett had looked at him and understood the entire thing, and neither of them ever mentioned it. And after that she didn't stop singing when he came in. The chair third. There had been a second chair at the fire for 8 years, angled toward the first one, and he had never once moved it, and never once sat in it, and never once let his eyes go all the way to it. And one night in December, he came in, and Clara was in it asleep with a ledger sliding off her lap. He stood there in his own front room for a full minute. Then he took the ledger off her lap and put a blanket over her and went to bed, and lay there in the dark with his heart going like he'd run somewhere, and said out loud to a woman 8 years in the ground, "I don't know what this is." The house didn't answer that either. The town started in January. It started the way those things start, which is not with a fist, but with a kindness. Mrs. Pell at the Mercantile, who had never in her life addressed Caleb Whitmore as anything but. Mr. Whitmore leaned over the counter and put her hand on his sleeve and said warmly, "Now, Caleb, I've heard you've got help out there." "That's right." "A young woman." "That's right." "Well," Mrs. Pell's hand stayed on his sleeve. "Nobody thinks a thing of it." Caleb went very still. "Say that once more." "I only mean nobody thinks a thing of it. I've said so. I've said it to several people. I've said that man buried a wife, and he's entitled to a housekeeper. And if some folks want to make it into something else, well, that's on their conscience, not mine." "How many people have you said that to, Mrs. Pell?" "Oh, she said everyone." He rode home with 60 pounds of flour and a feeling in his chest like a hand closing. He didn't tell Clara. That was his mistake, and he knew it was a mistake when he made it. And he made it anyway, because in 8 years of talking to nobody, a man loses the habit of saying the hard thing out loud. So he didn't tell her about Mrs. Pell, and he didn't tell her when Reverend Cobb rode out in February and sat on his horse in the yard for 20 minutes, explaining gently that he was concerned for the young woman's soul. And Caleb had said, "Ask her about it." And Cobb had said, "I'd rather discuss it with you." And Caleb had said, "That's the whole trouble with you, Reverend," and gone inside. And he didn't tell her, and he didn't tell her. And then Clara went into Red Hollow. She went on a Thursday for wire staples and coffee, and a bolt of cloth, and she was gone 9 hours, and Caleb walked the yard for the last 3 of them like a man with a stone in his boot. She came back at dark and unhitched the horse herself, and carried the goods in herself, and set them down and took her coat off and hung it up, and every motion of it was so exactly correct, so perfectly ordinary, that Caleb's stomach turned over. "Clara!" "There's no cloth. Mrs. Pell's out of cloth." She started putting coffee in the tin. "She's got 11 bolts on the shelf behind her, but she's out of cloth." I thought you'd want to know so you can go yourself next time. Clara. And Pike's boy followed me down to the livery to tell me a joke he'd heard. I'd repeat it, but I've got the sense you'd ride in tonight, and I'd rather have you here in the morning. Her hands were shaking. She kept putting coffee in the tin. It wasn't a good joke. It didn't even have the shape of a joke. It was just a sentence with my name in it. Clara put that down. And a woman I have never met in my life stopped me on the walk, Clara said, and took my hand, Caleb, and told me she'd pray for me. Not with me, for me. The tin went over. Coffee went everywhere. How long have you known? He didn't say anything. How long? Since January. She turned around. You let me walk into that. I didn't. You knew, Clara said, and you let me hitch up a horse and ride 9 miles into a town where every soul had already decided what I am, and you stood in the yard and watched me go. I didn't know how to say it. You say it with your mouth. Caleb, you open it and you make the words. She was shouting now full-throated, and it was the first time she had truly let go in his house, and it went through him like a spike. That's all it takes. That's the whole trick. I've watched you not say things for 4 months. You don't say her name. You don't say his name. You didn't say Dover was cheating you for 3 years because you couldn't open an envelope, and I have let you have it because it's your house and you're dead and your grief. But you do not get to protect me by keeping me stupid. That's not what I... That's exactly what you did. She was crying, and she was furious about the crying. I have had one thing my whole life. One. I walk in somewhere, and I know where I stand. I knew where I stood with the bank, and I knew where I stood with Ambrose's son, and I knew where I stood with the man who came for the furniture. And it was ugly, but I knew, and I could stand up in it. And you took that off me for 6 weeks. You let me sing in your kitchen while the whole county... She stopped. She put her hand over her mouth. Caleb crossed the room, and she put her other hand up flat against his chest and stopped him dead, and they stood there like that, and she got herself back an inch at a time, which was the most terrible thing he had ever watched anybody do. Don't, she said. If you're kind to me right now, I'll come apart and I can't afford it. I've got books to do. To hell with the books. Caleb, you want me to say things out loud? His voice was shaking. All right, here's one. I don't care what Red Hollow thinks. I have not cared what that town thought of me since 1879, and I have got 8 years of practice at not caring, and I am very good at it. That's you, Clara said. You're a man with 2,000 acres. They can't do a thing to you but talk. She took her hand off his chest. I'm a woman with $4. They can do everything. And that was the sentence that changed it. That was the one that got under the door and into the room and sat down in the chair and would not leave, and Caleb Whitmore lay awake all that night with it. Victoria Harrington came on the first day of March. She didn't send Belle. She came herself in a rig with 2 horses and a man to drive it, and she came right up to the door and let herself be handed down, and she was 54 years old and small and beautifully dressed, and she smiled at Caleb like they'd been friends for years. Mr. Whitmore, may I come in? It's perishing. No. That's fair, Victoria said pleasantly, and came in anyway, past him unhurried the way weather comes in. She stopped in the middle of his front room and looked around it with frank, unembarrassed interest. So this is it. I've wondered for years. She took a chair. Not the second chair, she took his. You'd be Miss Bennet. Clara was standing by the table with a pencil in her hand. I would. You're prettier than they said. That won't help you. Victoria arranged her gloves in her lap. Mr. Whitmore, I'll be brief because I don't enjoy this any more than you do. I'm withdrawing the offer. Caleb hadn't sat down. Fine. 9,000's off the table. It's 7 now. It's nothing now. It'll be 5 in April, Victoria said. And in May, it will be whatever I feel like saying. And in June, you will take it, and we'll both pretend this conversation didn't happen. Get out of my house, Mr. Whitmore? She looked up at him, and the pleasantness went out of her face, like a lamp being turned down. I have been buying this valley for 19 years. I bought the Ott place, and the Kessel place, and both sides of the creek, and everything from the ridge to the flat, and I have paid fair every time. And I have never once had to be ugly, and do you know why? Because every man I have ever sat across from has understood that the thing he was holding on to was not a ranch. It was a story he told himself about himself. She smiled again. Yours is a very good story. Widower on the mountain. Doesn't need a soul. 8 years of it. The whole county knows it by heart. You're done. I'm not, and here's why. Victoria turned her head and she looked at Clara. Because 4 months ago you changed the story, and you didn't even notice. Nobody moved. You've got something to lose now, Victoria said gently. That's all. That's the entire thing I came to say. For 8 years you had nothing to lose, and there wasn't a handhold on you anywhere. And then a girl walked up your road. Caleb said very quietly, You want to be careful. I'm being careful. I'm being kind, which is different from what I could be. She stood and shook out her skirt. Miss Bennet, a word of business since you're the one keeping his books now, or so I'm told. You've been here 4 months. Nearly 5. And what are you at present legally speaking? Clara's chin came up. I'm a hired hand. You're a hired hand, Victoria repeated, and she laughed a real laugh, warm, almost affectionate. Oh, my dear. Is that what he's told you? Do you know what a hired hand has? A hired hand has a contract. A hired hand has a bunkhouse and a boss and a road home. What you have is a room in a widower's house and $9 a month and a county that has already made up its mind. And the day he dies, and they all do, they get thrown or they get sick or they get shot. You will be standing in this yard with a suitcase and no more right to one stick of it than the dog. Clara didn't answer. That's not a threat, Victoria said. That's just the law. I didn't write it. I've just read it more carefully than you have. She pulled on a glove. Mr. Whitmore, 7,000 until April. She got to the door. Then she stopped and turned around and said pleasantly casually, like a woman remembering an errand, Oh, Miss Bennet. Ambrose. That was the name, wasn't it? In Hollis? Clara Bennet's face went white. I only ask, Victoria said, because Mr. Bell has a cousin who keeps a bank in Sedalia, and it's the most remarkable thing how small this country is. And she left. The rig was gone 20 minutes before either of them spoke. Clara was still standing at the table. She hadn't moved. The pencil was still in her hand, and it had snapped somewhere in there, and she hadn't noticed. Clara, don't. What's Ambrose? You know what Ambrose is. I told you, he died and his son didn't want a woman keeping his books, Clara. And he gave me $11 and a reference nobody would honor. Why? Caleb said would nobody honor it? She stopped. You said that in November, and I let it go by, he said. A good reference from a dead man's son. Nobody in that county would honor it. Why not? Clara put what was left of the pencil down. Because he told them I stole. The fire made a noise. Nothing else did. He told them, Caleb repeated. $311. She said it like a woman reading a number off a stone. Out of his father's accounts over 4 years, he said the books showed it. He said he'd have gone to the sheriff, except out of respect for the old man's memory. He'd rather I just left quietly, and I should count myself lucky. Did you? He didn't mean it the way it came out. He knew it the second it was in the air. He would have given the ranch and everything on it to have it back. Clara looked at him. There it is, she said. Clara. No, that's fair. That's the question. Everybody asks it. Mrs. Ambrose asked it, and she'd known me 9 years. She was smiling, and it was the worst thing he'd ever seen on a human face. I didn't. And I can't prove I didn't, and you can't prove you didn't either. That's the thing about it. There's no proving a didn't. All you can do is stand there while they look at you. Then how? His father lent him money, Clara said. That's all it was. That's the whole grand mystery. 11 times in 4 years, the old man gave his boy money out of the till and made me put it in the ledger as sundries because he was ashamed. And I said, Mr. Ambrose, we ought to write what it is. And he said, Clara, write sundries. So I wrote sundries, $311 of sundries. And then the old man died, and the son opened the books, and there it was, $311 going out the door with a woman's handwriting on every line and no name attached to any of it. Caleb sat down slowly. He knew, he said. He knew it was him. Of course he knew. He'd taken every dollar of it out of his own father's hand. Then why? Because his wife didn't know, Clara said. And his wife's family had money, and there was a woman standing right there with a pen in her hand who could be it instead. She shrugged, and the shrug was the most violent thing about her. It's not even wicked, Caleb. That's what took me longest to understand. He didn't hate me. He wasn't angry at me. I was just nearer to hand than the truth was. Caleb was up and moving. We're going to Hollis. Sit down. We're going to Hollis, and we're getting those books. He burned them. Caleb stopped. He burned them in June, Clara said. I know because Mrs. Kessler wrote me. Store fire. Very sad. Very contained. She turned her hands over. There's nothing there. There's nothing to get. There's a town of 400 people who all know that Bennett girl stole from the man who fed her, and there's a piece of paper in a bank in Sedalia with a number on it. And now there's a woman with $200,000 9 miles down that road who has both. Clara, do you see it now? She said, and her voice finally broke all at once straight through the middle. She's not going to take your land, Caleb. She's not going to fight you for it. She's going to hand this county a story where the lonely rancher got taken in by a thief, and every single soul in Red Hollow will believe it before she finishes the sentence, because they want to, because they've been waiting 5 months for the second half of the joke, and you will not be able to sell a cow or hire a hand or stand in the mercantile. And in June, you will take $5,000 just to get out from under it, and she will never have to prove one word. Caleb stood in the middle of his own front room and could not think of a single thing to say. That's why I wasn't going to stay, Clara said. In November. That's why I said I'd go at first light. I knew it'd follow me. It always follows me. It followed me 400 miles, and it walked in your door tonight in a nice pair of gloves. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand hard, like scrubbing a table. So I'll go. And in 3 weeks, she'll offer you 9 again, and you'll say no, and it'll be over because there won't be anything on you to hold. No. Caleb. No. You don't get a vote in this. It's my name. It's my road. Caleb said, and his voice came out of him at a volume that rattled the window, and Clara actually took a step back. You walked up my road. You knocked on my door. And I have spent 5 months finding out that everything I thought I knew about my own life was a lie I told myself standing over a burn barrel, and you think I'm going to stand in that yard and watch you go back down it. To what? To the poorhouse. So Red Hollow can be comfortable. To keep you from losing. I've already lost everything I've got, he shouted. That's the part you don't understand. I did that 8 years ago, Sarah went, and I put everything I had in a box, and I burned it, and the only thing I've owned since is dirt, and I'll trade every acre of it today right now for 1 hour of not being what I was in November. The room rang. Clara stared at him with her mouth open. You don't mean that, she said. Ask me again in June. Caleb, that's 2,000 acres. It's dirt, he said. Your father died with 90 acres and a daughter who lied to him about the weather, and I've got 2,000 in a burn barrel, and you tell me which one of us was rich. Clara sat down. She didn't do it gracefully. Her legs went and she went with them, and she sat in the second chair, the one that had been angled at the fire for 8 years, and she put her face in her hands. And Caleb Whitmore stood there and let her. Because it was the first time in 5 months she had allowed herself to be exactly as tired as she was. When she came up, her voice was ruined. What do? We fight it. With what? I don't know yet. That's not a plan. No, Caleb said. It's a decision. The plan comes after. That's the order they go in. Clara, Everybody gets it backwards. He crouched down in front of her chair. You told me something in November. You said you don't argue with people, you just wait for them to run out of reasons. That's not the same. It's exactly the same, he said. She's got one thing. One. She's got a number in a bank in Sedalia and a story. That's it. That's her whole hand. He looked up at her. Now what have we got, Maud? Nothing. Wrong, Caleb said. We've got the best bookkeeper in this territory, and we've got a woman who has been catching men stealing since she was 19 years old, and we've got the fact that Victoria Harrington has bought 11 ranches in 19 years and never once had to be ugly about it. Clara went still. Say that again? She said. She's never had to be ugly about it. She told us herself. She was bragging. No, Clara said slowly. No, that's not what she said. She said she's never had to be ugly. She lifted her head, and something was coming up behind her eyes that Caleb had not seen there before, and it took him a second to recognize it because he'd never seen it on her at all. It was interest. Caleb, where are the deeds? What deeds? Yours. The patent, the water claim, the survey, everything that came out of the land office when you proved up. They're in the crate. Under the window. They've been in there since 79. Clara said. And she was already standing. She hauled the crate out from under the window and put it on the table and started pulling out paper fast. Both hands, and Caleb watched her go. From a woman who'd been on the floor 2 minutes ago to a woman moving like a fire had started. What are you looking for? I don't know. Clara, I don't know, Caleb. That's the point. That's how it works. You don't know until it's in front of you. She was reading and dealing paper across the table like cards. 19 years, 11 ranches. And she has never had to be ugly. Doesn't that bother you? Why should it bother me? Because I've done books for 9 years, Clara said, and I have never once met a man who was honest 11 times in a row. Not once. Not ever. They're honest until it's expensive. She flipped a page. And she's about to be ugly for the first time in 19 years over your water. And she came to this house herself instead of sending Belle, and she sat in your chair, and she was rushing. She stopped. Dead. Both hands flat on a piece of paper, and her face doing something Caleb couldn't read at all. Clara. She didn't answer. Clara, what? Caleb, she said. When did you file your water claim? 76. Same year I proved up. You're sure? I'm sure. Why? Clara Bennett looked up from the table, and her voice came out strange and quiet, and about 10 degrees colder than the room. Because Victoria Harrington filed one on the same creek, she said, in 81, and there's a copy of it right here in your crate, and it was mailed to you, Caleb. It's got a red hollow postmark on the outside, and it was mailed in November of 81, and it has never been opened. Caleb didn't move for a long moment. Then he said, Give it to me. Caleb, give it to me. She put it in his hand. It was an envelope. That was all it was. Somebody's official hand across the front of it. C. Whitmore Red Hollow P.O. W.I.O. Ter. And a stamp and a smear of a postmark that said November of 1881. And the flap was still sealed with the same gum a clerk had licked 5.5 years ago. Caleb Whitmore stood in his own front room holding it, and he felt the floor tilt. It's in the crate, he said. Yes. It's in the crate, with the deeds. Yes. Then I didn't burn it. His voice came out wrong. Clara, I put it in the crate. That's the crate I keep the land in. I must have looked at the front of it and seen it was land office and put it in with the land, and never opened it. Never opened it. Because you don't open envelopes, Clara said, and there was nothing cruel in it at all, which was worse. Caleb, sit down before you fall down. He didn't sit down. He turned it over twice, like the back of it might have something to say. 5.5 years, he said. That's been in this room 5.5 years. I've walked past that crate, Clara. I have sat on that crate. I know. What if it's, open it. What if it says, I've lost thee, Caleb? She took it out of his hands, and she held it up between them, and her hand was steady and his was not. Listen to me. I've spent 9 years opening envelopes for men who couldn't. That's the whole job. That's actually the entire job, and nobody ever says so. Her voice dropped. It is never as bad as the not knowing. Never once. Not one time in 9 years. You don't know what's in it. No, Clara said. But I know what 5.5 years of not looking at it did to you, and whatever's in that envelope, it's cheaper than that. Caleb took it back. He opened it with his thumb, badly tearing it half across the face, and he pulled out 3 sheets of paper, and he read them, and Clara Bennett watched every muscle in his face. Then he handed them to her without a word and walked out of the room. She read them twice. She found him in the barn, which is where he always went, standing with one hand on the bay's neck and not doing anything at all. It's a notice of protest, she said. I know what it is. Filed by Victoria Harrington in October of '81 against your water claim on Cutter Creek, alleging non-beneficial use for the years 78 through 80. I know what it is, Clara. And the territorial engineer mailed you notice, and by law you had 90 days to answer it. She stopped. And you didn't answer it. No. And when a man doesn't answer, they take that as a man who agrees, Caleb said. He turned around and his face was gray. 78 through 80, he said. You know what that is? That's the years I didn't do anything. Sarah went in, the November of '79, and I didn't put in a headgate, I didn't clean a ditch, I didn't irrigate 1 acre. I had 190 head, and I sold 60 of them because I couldn't be bothered to feed them, and I sat in that chair and she was watching. Caleb, she was watching me the whole time. He laughed, and it came out like a cough. 19 years buying this valley, and she never had to be ugly. Of course she didn't. She never had to be ugly because she waits. She found a man who'd quit, and she filed on him, and she sent a boy with a letter, and she sat down, and she waited 5.5 years for me to look in a box. Clara didn't say anything. How bad is it? He said. I don't know. Clara. I don't know, Caleb. I keep books. I'm not a lawyer. Then guess. It's bad, she said. You want it plain, it's bad. There's a protest of record against your water unanswered for 5.5 years, and every day of those 5.5 years, she's been able to walk into a courthouse and pick it up off the shelf. She's had it the whole time. She's had it since before I was ever born into this. Caleb put his forehead against the bay's neck. Then why hasn't she used it? Clara stopped. Say that again? 5.5 years. He lifted his head. 5.5 years she's had a paper that takes my water, and she's spent every one of them riding out here offering me money. 8,000, 9,000. Belle came in November to say 9, and she came herself in March to say 7. He turned around. Why would a woman pay $9,000 for a thing she can take for free? Clara Bennett stood in the barn with 3 sheets of paper in her hand and did not say one word for 11 seconds. Then she said, Oh. What? Oh, God. What, Clara? Because it doesn't work, she said. Because it's rotten. Caleb, listen to me. A woman like that does not leave money on a table for 5.5 years out of manners. She's been trying to buy the thing she's already supposed to own, which means she knows the paper won't hold, which means there's something wrong with the paper, and she's been throwing thousands of dollars at you for 5 years to keep you from ever opening the envelope and finding out. Caleb stared at her. That's a guess. That's a ledger, Clara said. That's exactly what a ledger is. It's not what people tell you, it's what the money did. And the money's been walking up your road for 5 years, saying, please don't look. They went back inside, and they didn't sleep. She had the crate empty by midnight, and the table covered by 1, and the floor covered by 2. And Caleb sat across from her doing what she told him. Fetching holding reading numbers out loud, and somewhere around 3 in the morning, he realized he was watching a thing happen that he'd never seen a human being do. She wasn't reading, she was listening to it. She'd take a page and go still and then say quietly, that's wrong, and not be able to say why for another 10 minutes and then be right. At 4 she said, read me the date on your patent. June 11th, 1876. Again. June 11th, 76. And the water claim. March of 76. You filed water 3 months before you owned the ground. I filed water 3 months before the paper came through, Caleb said. I was on it 2 years by then. Everybody did it that way. Clara, you filed when you dug the ditch. You didn't sit around waiting on Washington. Everybody did it that way, Clara said, and her head came up. Caleb, everybody. That's what I said. Ott, Kessel, the 2 places on the creek. Sure. They filed the same way ditch first patent after, I imagine so. Ott had water in 74, he was here before me. Clara was already up. Where are you going? Nowhere. I can't go anywhere, it's 4 in the morning. She had both hands in her hair. Caleb, she bought Ott. She bought Kessel. She bought both sides of the creek and she told us so sitting right there she listed them like a woman showing off a dress. 11 ranches in 19 years and every one of them on this water. So when she bought Ott's place, what did she buy? The ground. And the water. And the water. It goes with... Caleb stopped. It goes with the ground, Clara said, if it was ever properly his. And if Ott filed the way you filed, ditch first paper after then, every single water right in this valley has the exact same crack in it that she says yours has. She was breathing hard. She can't argue it, Caleb. She can't ever argue it. The minute she stands up in a courthouse and says a water claim filed before patent is no good, she just shot the legs off every acre she owns. Caleb sat back in his chair very slowly. That's why she's been buying me, he said. That's why she's been buying you. She filed that protest in 81 to scare you into selling, and it nearly worked except you never opened it. You never opened it, and so you never got scared, and so you never sold, and she's been stuck with a loaded gun she doesn't dare fire ever since. Clara laughed one hard, disbelieving bark of it. 5.5 years. She's been terrified of you for 5.5 years and you didn't know she existed. Then we're fine. No, Clara, if she can't use it. She doesn't have to use it, Clara said, and the laugh went out of her all at once. That's the part. She never has to file a thing. She just has to make you unable to stand. Caleb, she said it to my face. She's not going to fight you for the ranch. She's going to make it so nobody in this county will look at you, and then you'll hand it to her for $5,000 and call it a mercy. She doesn't need a courtroom. She's got Sedalia. And they were right back where they'd been at dark. Caleb sat there a long time. Then we make her go to a courtroom, he said. How? By not selling. Caleb, no, listen. He leaned forward. She's got 2 things. She's got a paper she can't use and a story about you she can't prove. And she's got them in the wrong order and she knows it, and that's why she's rushing. 5.5 years of patience, and all of a sudden she's cutting the price, $2,000 a month. That's not a woman working a plan. That's a woman with a clock on her. Why would she have a clock? I don't know. That's the 3rd time tonight you've said, it's the 3rd time it's been true, Caleb said. Write it down. Put it in the book. Why is she in a hurry? Clara wrote it down. Then she put the pencil down and said without looking up, she's in a hurry because of me. What? Think about it. Her voice had gone flat. 5.5 years she waits. I get here in November. Belle's at the gate in 4 days knowing what town I'm from. She's here herself in March with the price falling. Clara finally looked up, and her eyes were wet and absolutely steady. She's not in a hurry because of a clock, Caleb. She's in a hurry because you stopped being a man who'd quit. You put a fence back up. You went after Dover for $248. You think that didn't go around this county in a day. She waited 5 years for you to rot and you didn't, and she wants it done before you get all the way back on your feet. Caleb sat with that. Then it's your fault, he said. Clara flinched like he'd hit her. That's the finest thing anybody ever did to me, Caleb said. Say it again. She got up and walked out of the room, and he heard the back door, and he let her have it. She came back in 11 minutes with her face washed. I have a condition, she said. For what? For staying and fighting. Because I'm going to stay and fight, I decided it out there so you can stop working on your speech. She sat down. But I have a condition. Name it. When it goes bad, not if. When you don't lie to me to protect me. Not one time. Not about a joke in the street. Not about what Mrs. Pell said. Not about a number in a book. Her voice went thin. You lied to me for 6 weeks in January, and I have not been all the way warm since. I'd rather you hurt me on a Tuesday than let me find out on a Thursday. Done. Say it. I won't lie to you. Caleb. Clara. He put his hand flat on the table. Ask me anything right now and I'll answer it. Anything. Try it. She looked at him. Do you want me to go? No. Have you wanted me to go any day since November? No. Not one day. Not 1 hour, Caleb said. And Clara Bennett looked away first, which she had never once done in 5 months in his house in her life. It went bad in April exactly the way she said it would. It started with a man named Kessler. No relation to her Kesslers, she said, and laughed about it in a way that had no laugh in it, who had been buying Caleb's yearlings for 6 years, and who wrote to say he'd be going a different direction this season. No reason. 2 lines. Best of luck. Then the bank in Cheyenne wrote to say that in light of certain irregularities brought to their attention regarding the party keeping Mr. Whitmore's accounts, they would be requiring his personal signature on all instruments going forward, which they trusted would present no difficulty. Then Mrs. Pell stopped selling him flour. She didn't say she'd stopped. She just was out of it, every time. 60 pounds of it on the shelf, and she was out of it. And she said it to his face with her hand on his sleeve warmly, and Caleb Whitmore stood in that store and understood exactly what Clara had meant in January about knowing where you stand. He told her all of it, every piece. He came in and sat down and said the whole ugly thing out loud every time, and it about killed him. And he did it anyway. And on the 9th of April, a boy rode out from town with a paper and would not get down off his horse, and it was a summons, not against Caleb, against Clara. It's a civil complaint, she said. She'd read it 4 times. Her voice was doing the flat thing. Filed by Randall Ambrose of Hollis, Missouri, in the district court of this territory for the recovery of $311, alleged converted. He can't do that. He's in Missouri. I'm in Wyoming, Clara said. That's the whole of it, Caleb. They sue you where you are. She set it down. He didn't do this. Randall Ambrose does not know where Wyoming is. Somebody found him and paid a lawyer and put a pen in his hand. Then we fight it. You said the books are burned. He's got no books either. He can't prove He doesn't have to prove it. Clara's hand came down flat on the table, and every dish on it jumped. Nobody has to prove anything. Don't you understand yet? He files it and it's a paper, and it goes in a courthouse where anybody can read it. And it doesn't matter what happens after in 5 years, when they've forgotten every fact of it. They'll remember there was something. That's all she's buying. She's buying a something. Caleb was quiet for a while. When's it heard? June. June, Clara said, which is the month she told you you'd take $5,000. She told us. She sat in your chair in March and gave us the date. Caleb got up. Where are you going? To Cheyenne. For what? For a lawyer. With what money the bank won't move a dollar without you standing in the lobby. Then I'll stand in the lobby, Caleb said, and he was already getting his coat, and he stopped with one arm in it and turned around. Clara, what's the thing you said to me in November about waiting? I said I don't argue with people. I wait for them to run out of reasons. How long's that take? Sometimes it doesn't, she said. He was gone 9 days. He came back on a Thursday at dark, and he came in and put a lawyer's letter on the table and sat down across from her, and he had a look on him she had never seen, not once, and it frightened her more than anything Victoria Harrington had ever said. Clara. What did he say? Clara, sit down. I'm sitting down. What did he say? Caleb turned the letter around. He said the water's fine, he said. He said the protest is garbage. 5 different men filed that same way on that creek, and if the engineer had ever ruled on one of them, the whole valley'd have come apart, and that's why nobody's ever ruled on it, and nobody ever will. He said Harrington couldn't push that protest with a team of mules. He laughed at it, Clara. He laughed at it. She let out a breath she'd been holding since February. Then, he said the Ambrose thing's garbage too, Caleb said. No books, no witness a plaintiff, 4 states off, 4 years stale. He said it dies in 20 minutes. Then what's the matter with your face? Caleb looked at his hands. He said none of it matters, he said. He said it 3 different ways and I kept making him say it again. He said, Mr. Whitmore, you will win both of these, and you will lose everything anyway, because winning takes 9 months, and a courthouse, and every soul in that county reading the complaint, and by the time the judge says the word dismissed, Miss Bennett will have been a thief in print for 3/4 of a year, and there is not one thing in the law that will give her back her name. Clara didn't move. And then he said the other thing, Caleb said. What other thing? He asked me what she was to me. Clara went very still. I said she keeps my books. And he took his spectacles off and he cleaned them for about 1.5 years and he said, Caleb's jaw worked. He said, Mr. Whitmore, that's the trouble. He said as long as she's a hired hand, she's a woman living alone in a widower's house, and every word Harrington whispers lands because there's no answer to it. Nothing to point at. Nothing that makes a person say, oh, well then. Caleb, he said, there's exactly one thing in this territory that shuts a room up, Caleb said. And it's not a lawyer, it's a marriage license. The silence went on a long time. No, Clara said. Clara, no. She was up and away from the table. Absolutely not, no. Will you let me? I know what it is, she said. I've known what it is since I was 22. It's the thing every woman with nothing gets offered eventually by somebody kind. And they always say it like it's a door, and it's not a door, Caleb. It's a fence. Clara. And I have said no to it 4 times in my life, and 2 of those were men my father liked, and I'd rather have gone in the ground than... Clara. She stopped. Caleb hadn't moved. He was still sitting there with his hands on the table. Sit down, he said. Please, I'm going to say this once, and I've been 9 days on it, and I'm going to do it badly, so let me finish. She sat down, barely. I don't want you here because you owe me anything, Caleb said. Don't. I said let me finish. His voice shook and he let it. Your father saved my life, and I burned his letters, and if I sat here and told you this was about him, I'd be doing to you exactly what I promised in March I wouldn't do, which is lie. So I'm not going to say it's about James. Clara's eyes were already streaming. Here's the whole of it, Caleb said. There's a paper in a courthouse in June with your name on it, and there's a woman 9 miles down that road who wants you to be nothing because a nothing can be moved. And I've got one thing in this world that says she isn't nothing loud enough that this county has to hear it, and it's my name, and it isn't worth much, but it's paid for. That's not a reason to marry somebody. It's a better one than most people get. Caleb. There'd be no demands, he said. Hear me, no demands, no debt, no obligation, no Clara, look at me. You'd have your room and your door and your work, and nothing in this house changes by 1 inch, not one. You could put a lock on that door tomorrow, and I'd hang it for you myself. It's a paper. It's a paper that makes you a person they have to prove things about. Clara Bennett put both hands over her face. Why? She said from behind them. Why would you do that? Because I've thought about it 9 days. Why? Because I don't want to eat supper alone, Caleb said. Her hands came down. That's it, he said. That's the whole reason, and it's a small one, and I'm ashamed of how small it is. I've got a lawyer's letter and a water claim and $248 off Dover, and I don't care about one solitary bit of it. In November, there was a chair by my fire that I hadn't looked at in 8 years, and in December you fell asleep in it, and I stood in that room, and I could not breathe, Clara. He stopped, started again. And she can have the ranch. I told you that in March, and I meant it. She can have every acre and the cattle with it, but she cannot have that chair. For a long moment, Clara Bennett did not make one sound, and then she cried properly out loud with noise, the way people cry when they're finally somewhere they're allowed to. And it went on a while, And Caleb sat where he was and didn't touch her, and didn't say a word, because he'd learned by then that touching her when she broke was the one thing that would make her stop. When she came up, her face was a ruin and her voice was gone. "You didn't ask me a question," she said. "What?" "You made a speech. You didn't ask me anything." She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, hard scrubbing a table. "You're the worst man at this I have ever met in my life." "Clara, ask me." Caleb Whitmore, 38 years old, opened his mouth twice before anything came out of it. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," Clara said, "and I have conditions." And Caleb laughed the third time in 8 years and put his face in his hands, and she started laughing too, and the two of them sat there in that kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, laughing like a pair of lunatics, with her father's letter in his shirt pocket. "Name them," he said. "I will not be your servant." "You were never going to be. You'd have been terrible at it." "I'm saying it, Caleb, let me say it." She held up a finger. "I will not be your servant. I'll work beside you, or I'll work somewhere else." Agreed. "Second, the $9 stands." He blinked. "You want wages?" "I want wages." "Clara, a wife doesn't." "A wife doesn't get anything," she said. "She gets kept, and I have been kept exactly one time in my life by a man in Hollis who fed me for 9 years, and then let his son call me a thief, and I will not do it twice. $9 a month in a book in my hand. And if there ever comes a day I want to walk down that road, I want to walk down it with money in my pocket that I earned, and not have one single person in this house able to say I was given it." Caleb stared at her. $9, he said. $9. You are the most aggravating human being God ever... Third, Clara said. There's a third. There's a third, and it's the only one that matters, so listen. She leaned across the table. You will not protect me because I'm weak. I never said. You didn't have to say it, you did it in January for 6 weeks. Her voice cracked straight down the middle. If we do this, then in June, I walk into that courthouse. Not you. Me. It's my name on that complaint, and I will stand up in that room, and I will answer for it with my own mouth, and you will sit down and let me, and it will be the hardest thing you ever did in your life. Clara, say it. Caleb was quiet for a very long moment. I'll sit down, he said. You mean it? No, Caleb said. But I'll do it. And Clara Bennett put her hand across the table, and he took it, and it was small and cold, and had the palm of a woman who had done 400 miles of somebody else's work, and he shook it once hard like a deal between men. They married on the 19th of April, in a judge's front room in a town nobody had heard of, 30 miles the wrong way, because Caleb said Red Hollow could read about it, and Clara said she'd rather be married by a stranger than watched by 400 people who'd already decided. There were 2 witnesses, and neither of them knew their names. She wore the better of the 2 dresses. On the ride back, she didn't say anything for about 9 miles, and then she said, Caleb. Yeah. Did you tell anybody? I told the Sentinel, he said. Paid for it. 2 lines Saturday's paper front page if he can get it there. Clara turned her head and looked at him. You paid to put it in the paper. That's the entire point of it, Clara. A paper nobody reads doesn't shut anybody up. He kept his eyes on the road. It'll be in Harrington's hand by Sunday noon. She'll be furious. I certainly hope so. And Clara Bennett laughed out loud, and the dog in the wagon bed picked its head up, and for about 4 miles, it was the best day Caleb Whitmore had had since 1879. It lasted until Tuesday. Bell came up the road at noon, and he did not get down off his horse, and he was not smiling. Whitmore. Bell. Mrs. Harrington sends her congratulations. He said it like a man reading it off a card. Sincerely. She wanted that word in particular. Sincerely. Tell her thank you. She also wanted me to ask after your wife's health. Caleb went very still. Say that again. She wanted me to ask, Bell said, after Mrs. Whitmore's health, on account of the trial being in June, and June being a warm month and a woman under strain. and then Belle stopped because Clara had come out onto the step behind Caleb. "I'm well, Mr. Bell," she said. "Tell her I'm well." "Ma'am, and tell her something else." Clara's voice didn't rise at all. "Tell her I've been through her filings at the land office, all 11. I sent for the abstracts in March and they came Friday, and I've read every one of them twice. And tell her, Mr. Bell, look at me. I want this said properly. Tell her I know what she did to Ott." Caleb turned his head so fast his neck cracked. And Belle Young, clean good coat, went the color of a bedsheet. "Ma'am, I don't—" "Just say the words," Clara said. "You don't have to know what they mean. She will." Belle rode off. Caleb stood there in the yard for about 4 seconds. Then he said in a voice that did not sound like his own, "Clara, what did she do to Ott?" And Clara Bennett said, "I have no idea." "What?" "I don't know a thing." Her hands were shaking so hard she had to put them under her arms. "The abstracts came Friday, and they're clean." "Caleb, they're perfectly clean. There's nothing wrong with one line of them. I made it up." "You made it up. 19 years and 11 ranches, and she has never once had to be ugly," Clara said. "You told me that. You told me it in March, and I have not slept a full night since, because I have kept books for 9 years, and there is no such man, and I have been sitting in your kitchen for 2 months trying to find it in paper. And it isn't in paper, Caleb. That's why she's never had to be ugly. Whatever it is, it's not written down anywhere." "Then why in God's name would you—" "Because there's only one way left to find out," Clara said. "You said it yourself. It's not what people tell you. It's what the money does." She looked down the road where Belle had gone, and her voice went strange and quiet. "So we sit here. And if I'm wrong, nothing happens, and I've made a fool of myself in front of a boy on a horse. And if you're right—" "If I'm right," Clara said, "she'll be at that door by dark." She was wrong. Victoria Harrington was at the door in 2 hours. She didn't bring a driver. That was the first thing Caleb noticed, and the second thing was that Clara noticed it too, because she said it out loud, before the rig had even stopped rolling. "She's driving herself." So in 19 years that woman has never held a rein in this county." Clara's voice had gone very quiet. "Caleb," she didn't want a man to hear what she came to say. Victoria Harrington got down without help, which she plainly hadn't done in a long while, and she came up the path and she did not knock. "Miss Bennett." "Mrs. Whitmore," Clara said. Victoria stopped like she'd walked into a rope. "Yes?" she said. "That's right. Saturday's paper, front page. 2 lines. She came in and stood in the middle of the room and didn't take a chair this time. And Caleb realized that was the tell in March. She'd sat down in his chair like she owned the floor under it, and now she was standing in the middle of his room like a woman in a bank. "Mr. Whitmore, I'd like a word with your wife." "You can have it right here." "I'd like it alone." "You can have it right here," Caleb said. Victoria looked at him a moment. Then she made a small sound, almost amused, almost not. "Fine." She turned to Clara. "What did you say to Belle?" "He told you what I said to Belle." "He told me a sentence. He's a boy, he repeats sounds. I want it from you." Victoria's gloves were still on. She hadn't taken them off. Clara was watching the gloves. "You said you'd been through my filings. All 11. And—" "They're clean," Clara said. Victoria's chin came up half an inch. "They're perfectly clean," Clara said. "Ott's Kessels both sides of the creek, the 2 on the flat, the bar M, the piece you took off the Loomis widow in '83. Every one of them is properly executed, properly witnessed, properly recorded, and paid at or above the fair price of the year. There is not one crooked line in 19 years of paper. I've never seen anything like it in my life." "Then I don't know what you imagine you're—" "That's what frightened me," Clara said, and Victoria Harrington stopped talking. "I've kept books for 9 years, Mrs. Harrington," Clara said. "I have never in my life seen a clean set, not one. Everybody's got a bad year. Everybody's got a cousin. Everybody's got $11 that went out the door on a Tuesday and never came back. And you've got 19 years without a fingerprint on it. And you told us so yourself, sitting in that chair in March, like it was a compliment you were paying yourself. She hadn't raised her voice 1 degree. Clean books don't mean a woman didn't do anything, ma'am. It means she did it somewhere the books don't go. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Victoria said pleasantly, "You have no idea what you're talking about." "No," Clara agreed. "You don't know one thing." "Not one." "You made it up." "Every word," Clara said. And Caleb watched Victoria Harrington understand that she had driven herself 9 miles alone in the middle of a Tuesday over a sentence a girl had invented on a doorstep. She laughed. It was a real laugh. Warm, delighted, and it went on for about 4 seconds, and it was the most frightening thing Caleb had ever heard out of a human being. "Oh," Victoria said, "you're good." "Thank you." "No, I mean that. I want you to hear that I mean it. That was very well done." She pulled off one glove finally and folded it over her wrist. "It won't matter. But it was well done, and I've been at this 19 years, and I have not been made to feel foolish in 11 of them, so well done." "You're here," Clara said. "I'm here because a boy on a horse gave me a fright, and I would rather ride out and settle it than sit up all night with it. That's not a confession, dear. That's housekeeping." "Then why'd you come alone?" Victoria's hand stopped on the second glove. "Belle drives you," Clara said. "Belle has driven you for 6 years. And whatever you were going to say in this room, you didn't want Belle to hear it, which means it isn't about the water, and it isn't about Ambrose, because Belle's already carried both of those up this road with his own mouth." She leaned forward 1 inch. "So there's a third thing, and Belle doesn't know it. And you came 9 miles by yourself to find out if I did." Victoria Harrington did not move for a very long time. Then she said, "Mr. Whitmore, your wife is the most dangerous person in this valley, and you have her doing sums." "I've noticed," Caleb said. "Sit down, both of you." Victoria took a chair. Not his. She took the second chair, the one by the fire, and Caleb went rigid, and she saw it, and she got out of it, and took a different one. And that small correction, that flicker of a woman deciding not to spend a card, told Caleb more than anything she'd said yet. "I'll make it simple," Victoria said. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to offer you $2,000. Clara said nothing. $2,000 in your hand in a bank of your choosing in your name and no one else's, and a letter from Randall Ambrose withdrawing his complaint with an apology in it. Signed, notarized. I'll have it in a week. And you get on a train. Caleb was up out of his chair, and Clara said, "Caleb," without turning her head, and he stopped. "You'd go east," Victoria said. "New York, Philadelphia, wherever it is you want. $2,000 is 4 years of living for a careful woman, and you are the most careful woman I have ever met. You'd have a room with your own key in it. You'd have a name nobody in that city has ever heard, and every ledger in Philadelphia is crooked, and every one of them needs somebody who can hear it." She spread her hands. "That's not a threat. That's the best offer you will ever get in your life, and I mean that literally. You may live another 50 years, and no one will ever again offer Clara Bennett $2,000 for nothing." "For nothing," Clara repeated. "For a train ticket." "And Caleb. Mr. Whitmore takes $7,000 in May and goes wherever men like him go." Victoria didn't even look at him. "He'll be fine, dear. He was fine for 8 years. He's very good at it." The room was quiet. "Say the number again," Clara said. Caleb's stomach dropped through the floor. $2,000. "Say it once more." $2,000, Victoria said. And there was a thing in her voice now, the first crack in 19 years of pleasantness, and Caleb heard it, and Clara heard it, and Clara smiled. "You've never done that before either," Clara said. "Done what?" "Paid a person to leave." Clara stood up. 11 ranches, 19 years. Fair price every time above it, twice no fraud, no lawyers, no ugliness, and no bribes. Mrs. Harrington, because a woman who pays a bribe has admitted she couldn't get it the other way. That's a first. That's a 19-year first. and you just did it in a kitchen you drove yourself to." Her voice never went above conversational. "Whatever the third thing is, I'm nearer to it than I was an hour ago, and you've just told me so with $2,000. Victoria Harrington sat perfectly still. And then she said very quietly, and for the first time without one grain of warmth in it, "You want to know what I did to Ott?" "Yes." "I did nothing," Victoria said. Caleb felt the room go sideways. "That's it. That's the whole of it. You've been through my filings looking for a knife, and there isn't one because I have never in my life had to do a single thing." She stood, and she pulled the second glove on finger by finger. "I did nothing to Ott for 4 years. And at the end of 4 years he came to me, walked into my house, sat in my parlor and asked me to buy him, and cried while he did it, and I paid him $900 over what it was worth, because I am not a monster. And he thanked me. He thanked me, Mrs. Whitmore. He held my hand." Clara had gone white. "That's not a crime," Victoria said gently. "There's no statute in this territory against not doing anything. There's no paper for it. There's no witness to it. There's no ledger line. There's nothing to subpoena. There is nothing there, and you cannot fight it, because you can't stand up in a courtroom and say, 'She left him alone.'" She got to the door. "You want the terrible secret? That's it. That's 19 years. I wait. Men out here break themselves, every single one of them. All I have ever had to do is be the only person in the county who's still standing when they're done, and I have never once had to raise my voice." "Victoria," Caleb said. She turned around, and Caleb Whitmore said, $2,000 for a woman to get on a train is not nothing." Victoria smiled at him, and it was almost kind. "No," she said. "It isn't. And I've never had to spend it before." She looked at Clara for a second. "That's your doing. Congratulations. It cost you everything." She left. Clara stood in the middle of the room for about a minute and a half without saying anything at all, and then her knees went, and Caleb got a chair under her about half a second before the floor did. "Clara, I'm all right." "You're not." "I'm all right, Caleb. I'm sitting down. That's what sitting down is for." She had both hands around her own elbows. "Did you hear it?" "I heard all of it." "No, did you hear it?" She looked up and her eyes were enormous. "She said I did nothing. She said it like it was a fortress, like it was the one wall nobody's ever got over." "It is." "It's a lie," Clara said. Caleb went still. "Caleb, listen to me. Think about what she actually claimed. She waits. Men break on their own, and she's just the last one standing." Clara's hands were moving now. "Ott had a son. Daniel. He's in Cheyenne. Freight business, I think. Ott had a son in Cheyenne, 190 miles off, and he broke anyway, alone. Kessel had 2 brothers in Nebraska. The Loomis widow had a sister in Denver. I read it in the abstract. The sister witnessed the deed in 71. Clara stood up and she was shaking, and it wasn't fear anymore. "And every single one of them broke alone, Caleb. Every one. 11 ranches in 19 years, and not one solitary person ever came. People don't come. People come." She said it so loud the dog got up. "That's the thing about people. It's the only decent thing about them. They come. Somebody's brother rides out. Somebody's sister writes. My father's whole town brought food for 2 years and plowed our field for nothing. And they were 400 people who had nothing themselves, and they still came, and good ran out at the end, but it took 2 years to run out." She was crying, and she didn't seem to know it. 11 times, Caleb. 11 men and women in 19 years, and not one of them ever had one single person show up. That isn't waiting. That's not nothing. Nothing doesn't come out that clean 11 times in a row. Caleb sat down very slowly. "Then what is it?" "I don't know." "Clara, it's not written down," she said. "That's all I know. She told us the truth about that. There's no paper on it, and she's not frightened of a courthouse, and she's not frightened of a lawyer. She's got more lawyers than I've got dresses. She drove herself 9 miles because she's frightened of one person knowing one thing." She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. So what's a thing that isn't in any book that a woman can do to a man from 9 miles away for 4 years without ever once being ugly that keeps his own son from ever coming to him? And Caleb Whitmore said, "Oh my God." He said it so quietly, Clara almost missed it. "Caleb." He was looking at his own hands. "Caleb." "What?" "Mrs. Pell," he said. "The woman at the store." "Mrs. Pell keeps the post office," Caleb said. "It's in the back of the mercantile. It's been in the back of that mercantile since before I came out here. She's the postmistress, Clara. She has been for 11 years. Everything that comes into Red Hollow goes across that counter, and everything that goes out of it goes across it too, and she puts her hand on your sleeve and says, 'Nobody thinks a thing of it.'" Clara didn't move. "She's out of flour," Caleb said, and his voice was coming apart. "She's got 60 pounds on the shelf, and she's out of flour, and she's said it to my face 4 times since April." "Caleb." And I stood there and let her, and I thought, well, that's a woman who's picked a side. "Caleb." "She's owned," Caleb said. "She's not wicked. She's owned. Somebody's been carrying her store for 11 years and it costs about $40 a month and nobody ever writes it down." The two of them looked at each other across that kitchen. "Ott's letters," Clara said. "Ott's letters. He wrote to his son." "He'd have written every week," Caleb said. "That's what a man does. That's what your father did. He wrote 4 times. And then he stopped. And Clara watched the color go out of him, and she understood a half-second before he did. "No," she said. "No, Caleb. I burned mine," Caleb said. "That's not the same." "It's exactly the same." He was on his feet. "That's what she does, Clara. That's the third thing. She makes a man wait on mail that never comes until he's so certain the world has forgotten him that he walks into her parlor and asks to be bought. She did it 11 times. And I did it to your father with my own 2 hands and a burn barrel, and I never even got paid." Clara came across that room and grabbed him by both arms, and it was the first time in 5 months she had ever put her hands on him on purpose. "Stop. Clara, stop." She shook him. She was half his size, and she shook him. "You are not her. Do you hear me? You did the worst thing you ever did in your life, because you were a man lying on the floor of a house with your wife 9 days in the ground, and you have been paying for it every hour since November. I have watched you pay for it. She's done it 11 times on purpose in a good coat and slept every night." Her voice cracked. "You want to be her, be her. Sit down. Do nothing. That's all it takes." Caleb stood there breathing. "Write to Daniel Ott," he said. "Caleb, write to Daniel Ott tonight," he said, "and I'll ride to Sheridan and mail it because I am not putting one more piece of paper across that woman's counter as long as I live." He was gone 2 days. When he came back, Clara had 4 letters written, and 3 of them were for people in 3 different towns, and she'd worked out the thing that had been sitting in the back of her head since Victoria said the word Sedalia, and she made him sit down before she'd tell him. "The bank," she said. "Belle's cousin. The one who found out about Ambrose." "What about him?" "He's the whole case," Clara said. "Caleb, think. Randall Ambrose says I took $311 out of his father's till across 4 years. And his books are burned. So how does he prove it?" "He doesn't. The lawyer said." "He proves it with bank records," Clara said. "That's the only thing left in the world. He'll bring the old man's deposits and show the till came up short 11 times and say, 'Look, there's the hole, and there's the woman who kept the book. And the bank that has all of it, every deposit old Mr. Ambrose made for 9 years, is the bank in Sedalia.'" Caleb went very still. "And Belle's cousin runs it." "Belle's cousin runs it," Clara said. "Which means Victoria Harrington's lawyer will subpoena it. She'll bring it into that courtroom herself in her own hand to hang me with." "Clara." "And here's what she doesn't know," Clara said, and her voice had gone strange and light. "Randall Ambrose banked there too." Caleb's mouth opened. "Same bank, same town. His wife's family's bank." Clara was smiling now, and it was terrible. 11 times in 4 years his father took money out of that till and handed it to him and made me write sundries. And every one of those 11 times that boy walked it straight across the square and put it in his own account, because that's what he did with everything he ever touched. He never in his life sat on a dollar for one night. You can't know that. No, Clara said. But I know the dates. She reached under the table and put a book on it. It was small and cheap, and the cover was gone off it, and the string was holding it together, and Caleb had seen it in her hands 1,100 times, and had never once asked what it was. What's this? It's my daybook, Clara said. I've kept one since I was 19 years old. Every day I ever worked, every hour, every dollar I was ever paid, and every single time in my life, somebody told me to write a thing in a book that wasn't true. She opened it. November 9th, 1880. Mr. A took $22 from till. Told me to write sundries. Said do not put his name. I asked twice. She turned a page. March 4th, 81. $40. Asked again. He said Clara write sundries. He was ashamed. Do not ask him again. Caleb couldn't speak. 11 entries, Clara said. 9 years, in my hand in ink dated, and every one of them written the same day it happened, because I was frightened of exactly this since the first time he asked me, and I never once said so out loud to a living soul. Clara, match those 11 dates against Randall Ambrose's deposits, she said, and the whole thing turns inside out in about 90 seconds. Caleb put both hands flat on the table. You've had this since November. I've had it since I was 19. You've had it in your pocket, Clara. You sat in this kitchen in March and told me there was no proving a didn't, and you had it in your— It proves nothing, she shouted. Don't you understand? It's my book. It's a book kept by the woman accused in her own hand with no witness on earth. Any lawyer alive stands up and says she wrote it last Tuesday and the whole thing's air. She was breathing hard. It's only worth something if the bank's records are in the room first. If I bring it, it's a forgery. If she brings the bank and I bring the book after, then it's 11 dates that a woman in Wyoming could not possibly have known unless she was standing there when it happened. Caleb stared at her. So you need Victoria to subpoena the bank? I need Victoria to subpoena the bank, Clara said. And I need her to want it badly. And I need her to be in an almighty hurry when she does it, and Caleb she is. And if she doesn't, then I lose, Clara said simply. The trial was on the 11th of June. The room was full at 8 in the morning. Caleb had never in his life seen that many people in Red Hollow at once, and every one of them had come 9 miles in the heat for a civil complaint over $311. And Caleb Whitmore understood that not one of them had come for the money. Randall Ambrose was there, in a new suit, and he would not look at Clara, and that alone told Caleb everything about the man. Victoria Harrington sat in the 3rd row, with her hands in her lap, and when the judge asked who appeared for the defendant, Clara Bennett Whitmore stood up and said, I do. Caleb sat down. It was the hardest thing he had ever done in his life, and he had carried his wife's coffin. He sat down and he put his hands on his knees, and he did not move for 4 hours while a man in a new suit stood in front of 400 people and called his wife a thief 11 separate times, and twice Caleb's hands came off his knees. And both times Clara did not turn around, and both times he put them back. Victoria's lawyer brought the bank. He brought it at 11:40 in the morning, and he brought it beautifully, a certified abstract of the accounts of Ambrose and Son Hollis, Missouri, 1878 to 1884, and he laid it out for the judge line by line, and there it was exactly the way Clara had said, 11 holes, 4 years, $311. And who, he said, kept those books? I did, Clara said. No further questions. Caleb closed his eyes. Then Clara said, I'd like to ask the banker something. The banker's name was Ivory Bell, and he was 50-some and pink, and about as happy to be in Wyoming as a fish. And he sat down in the chair like a man being fitted for something. Mr. Bell, you brought the store's account. I did. Who subpoenaed it? counsel for. He stopped. His eyes went to the third row, and Caleb watched every soul in that courtroom watch him do it. I was asked, "By whom?" "Objection," said Victoria's lawyer. "Withdrawn," Clara said. "Mr. Bell, does your bank hold other accounts out of Hollis?" "Certainly." "How many?" 200 thereabouts." "Does it hold one for Mr. Randall Ambrose?" The room made a noise. "It does. Personally, in his own name. In his own name, and his wife's." "Did you bring it?" "I was not asked to bring it." "Do you have it?" Ivory Bell looked at his hands. "Mr. Bell," Clara said, "you rode 4 days. Did you bring the whole book or half of it?" "I brought the ledger," he said. "It's the accounts are bound together. It's the same book." "So Mr. Randall Ambrose's personal account is in this room?" "Yes." The judge said, "Mr. Bell, is that so?" "Your Honor, it's the same volume." And Caleb Whitmore watched Victoria Harrington's face, and it did not change one particle. And that was how he knew. "Your Honor," Clara said, "I'd ask the court to read 11 dates out of the store's account, just the dates. And then I'd ask the court to read Mr. Randall Ambrose's own account on those same 11 days. I won't touch the book. I won't go near it. Let the court do it. Let Mr. Bell do it. I'll stand right here." Victoria's lawyer was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is—" "Sit down," the judge said. It took 11 minutes. The courtroom was so quiet Caleb could hear a fly. November 9th, 1880, $22 out of Ambrose and Son. November 9th, 1880, $22 into the account of R. Ambrose. March 4th, 1881, 40 out. March 4th, 1881, 40 in. Same day. Every time. 11 times. $311. The judge got to the 9th one and stopped and took his spectacles off and looked at Randall Ambrose for a very long time, and Randall Ambrose was the color of paper. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge said, "how did you know the dates?" And Clara said, "Because I wrote them down the day they happened. Your Honor, and I've had them in my pocket for 6 years, and I would like to hand them up now after your book, and not before, because I want every person in this room to understand that I could not have written that in Wyoming." She handed up the daybook. Randall Ambrose's lawyer asked for a recess and did not get one. It should have ended there. That was the thing Caleb thought about afterward. It should have ended right there, and it would have, and the town would have gone home and told it 11 different ways, and half of them would still have had Clara stealing. And Caleb Whitmore stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to say something." "Mr. Whitmore, you're not a party to—" "I know it. I'm asking anyway." "Caleb," Clara said. "Caleb." He didn't look at her because if he'd looked at her, he wouldn't have done it. 2 minutes, the judge said. Caleb Whitmore turned around and faced 400 people who had known him for 12 years and buried his wife with him and called him cold. "Most of you know my name," he said. "You don't know a thing about me. That's my fault. I made sure of it." Nobody breathed. "In '79, my wife died and I quit," Caleb said. "That's the plain word for it, and I've never used it before. I quit. I didn't work my ground for 3 years. I sold 60 head because I couldn't be troubled to feed them. And I stopped opening my mail for 8 years, and I want you to hear that because it sounds like a small thing, and it is not a small thing. I put a box out by my door, and then I quit opening it, and when it filled up, I took the whole business out behind the smokehouse, and I burned it in a barrel." He heard somebody in the back say something. He kept going. "There was a man named James Bennett," Caleb said. "He pulled me out of a snowbank on Cutter's Ridge in '67 when I was 19 years old, and carried me 1.5 miles on his back, and sat up with me all night, and he never once asked me for one thing in 20 years. His voice went. He stood there in front of 400 people and waited for it, and it came back. He wrote to me 4 times while he was dying, Caleb said. 79, 81, twice in 83, and I burned every one of them without reading a word, and he died in a house they took off him in March of 84, asking his daughter if there was anything from Wyoming. The sound the room made was not a sound Caleb had ever heard before. "That's the man you've been calling cold for 8 years, he said. "You had it right. You just didn't know how right. Mr. Whitmore, the judge said. "Half a minute more, Your Honor." Caleb turned. "The reason I'm saying it out loud in front of my neighbors and my wife and God is because I want every person in this room to know exactly what it does to a man when nobody comes. It killed James Bennett. It near enough killed me, and it took a woman walking 11 miles in the dark and knocking on my door to stop it. And she is the only reason I am standing up in this room instead of sitting in a chair 9 miles from here waiting to die." He looked at the third row. "Now there's a lady in this town," Caleb said, "who has bought 11 ranches in 19 years and never once had to be ugly about it. And she told me why herself in my own kitchen in April. She said, 'I do nothing.' She said it like she was proud of it. She said men out here break themselves, and all she's ever had to do is be the last one standing." Victoria Harrington sat absolutely still. "And I believed her," Caleb said, "for about 2 hours. And then my wife asked me a question I have not been able to put down since, and I'll ask you, and then I'll sit down." He looked around the room. "Every one of those 11 had people," Caleb said. "Ott had a boy in Cheyenne. Kessel had 2 brothers in Nebraska. The Loomis widow had a sister in Denver. Every last one of them had somebody who'd have come. And not one solitary person ever did, not once in 19 years, 11 times running." He let it sit. "You've all lived here. You know these people. You tell me how that happens." Nobody said anything. And then a man stood up in the back of the courtroom. He was about 40. And he was dusty, and he'd come in at some point that morning, and nobody had marked him, and he said in a voice that carried to every corner of that room, "My name's Daniel Ott." Caleb heard Clara make a sound. "That was my father," the man said. "And I've been sitting here 4 hours, and I'd like to say one thing, if the court'll let me, because I've come 300 miles on a letter that was mailed out of Sheridan, and I'd like to know why in the name of God it had to be mailed out of Sheridan." The judge said, "Sir, my father wrote to me twice in 9 years, Daniel Ott said. "Twice. Once when my mother died, and once to say he'd sold. And I have carried it for 6 years that the man didn't want me, and this gentleman is standing up here saying he burned his own mail, and I'll tell you what, sir, I wish my father had burned his. I'd rather he burned it, because I wrote to him." The room came apart. "I wrote him every month for 4 years. Daniel Ott said over the noise. "And I never had one word back, and I quit, and he sold, and he died, and I sat in Cheyenne thinking my father was a hard old man who didn't want his son, and I would like to know." And his voice broke wide open. "I would like somebody in this room to tell me where my letters went." The judge was hammering, and in the middle of all of it, Caleb Whitmore turned and looked at the third row, and Victoria Harrington was already looking at him. And she wasn't smiling. And Clara Bennett Whitmore, who had walked 11 miles in the dark in a dead man's coat with $4, was standing in the middle of that courtroom, with her hands at her sides perfectly still watching the door. Because Mrs. Pell had just stood up. Mrs. Pell stood up, and the entire room went quiet. The way a room only goes quiet when 400 people all understand something at the same instant. She was 61 years old. She had been behind that counter for 19 years. She had sold flour and thread and postage to every soul in the county, and she had put her hand on their sleeves, and she had said, "Nobody thinks a thing of it." And now she was standing in the third row, 2 seats down from Victoria Harrington, with her mouth working and nothing coming out of it. "Ma'am," the judge said, "sit down." "I can't," Mrs. Pell said. "Ma'am, I can't. Your Honor, I've been sitting for 11 years. Her voice was terrible, not loud, not weeping, just thin and stretched to the very end of itself. "That young man wants to know where his letters went." "Mrs. Pell," Victoria Harrington said, quietly, pleasantly, and Caleb Whitmore watched something happen that he would tell his grandchildren about 60 years later and never get right. Mrs. Pell flinched. 400 people saw it. She flinched at her own name in that woman's mouth, the way a dog flinches at a raised hand, and then she heard herself flinch, and Caleb saw the exact half-second in which Elsa Pell decided she had rather die than do that again. "Don't," she said. Don't you say my name. Not one more time in this life. Elsa, you don't say my name, she screamed. The judge stopped hammering. They went in the stove, Mrs. Pell said. Nobody breathed. Daniel Ott's letters, 41 of them. I counted God forgive me. I counted every one because I kept thinking I'd stop at the next one, and then I never did. She had both hands on the back of the bench in front of her. 41 letters from a boy in Cheyenne to his father, and I burned every one in the stove behind the post counter, and then I sold his father a sack of flour and asked after his health. The room came apart. It took the judge 4 minutes to get it back, and Caleb heard none of it. He was watching Daniel Ott, who had not moved, who was standing in the back of that room with his hat in both hands and his face doing something no man should have to do in public. Mrs. Pell. The judge's voice had gone flat and cold. Do you understand what you are saying in this room? Yes, sir. That's a federal crime. Yes, sir. 11 years of it. She was shaking so hard the bench was moving. You'll want the rest. I'd rather say the rest. Say it. Ott's boy, 41. Kessel's brothers out of Nebraska. I don't know the number it was. Years it was every month for a long while. The Loomis widow's sister in Denver wrote her 9 times in one winter, and that woman sat in my store and cried, and said she'd been forgotten. Mrs. Pell's face was streaming. And I gave her a peppermint. I gave that woman a peppermint. Clara Bennett Whitmore had not moved 1 inch. She was still standing in the middle of that floor with her hands at her sides. Mrs. Pell, she said. And the old woman looked at her and looked away and looked back and could not hold it. James Bennett, Clara said. Ma'am. Hollis, Missouri, Clara said. 4 letters, 79, 81, and twice in 83. My father's hand on 3 of them, and my hand on the 4th. Her voice never rose. It never once rose. My husband stood up in this room 10 minutes ago in front of every person he's got left in this world, and said he burned my father's letters in a barrel behind his smokehouse. He's carried that since November. He has not slept a whole night since November. Clara, Caleb said, did those 4 letters ever leave your counter? The room was so quiet, Caleb could hear the woman breathing. No, Mrs. Pell said. Caleb Whitmore sat down. He didn't decide to. His legs went, and he sat, and Clara turned around and her face. Caleb saw her face, and she was across that floor and had him by both hands in front of 400 people, and the judge did not say one word about it. Caleb. They never came. They never came. I burned. He couldn't get it out. Clara. I burned the box. I burned the sack. I stood there and watched it. You burned a grocer's account and 11 notices from the land office, Clara said. You burned a catalog and somebody's Christmas card. His letters never got past Red Hollow. Not one of them. Not one, Caleb, not ever. Then he waited on a woman with a stove, Clara said. Not on you. Never on you. And Caleb Whitmore put his face in his wife's hands and wept in front of the entire county, and there was not one solitary person in that room who thought a thing of it. The judge let it run a full minute before he said, Mrs. Pell, why? Sir, you've told this court you committed a federal offense every month for 11 years. I'd like to know why. And Mrs. Pell said, for $40. The noise that went through the room then had a sort of horror in it. $40 a month, she said. That's what it costs to keep a store alive in a town of 400 people, Your Honor. I was $1,100 down in 75, and my husband was 3 years dead, and I was going to lose it, and a woman came in and said she'd carry me. Her voice went to almost nothing. And she carried me. 11 years. She never asked me for one thing. Not once. Not ever. Then what did she ask? She never asked? Mrs. Pell said. That's what I'd like this room to understand. She never asked me one time in 11 years. She'd come in and buy her thread and she'd say, Elsa, that Ott's a hard man, isn't he? Won't take help from a soul. Wouldn't surprise me if he had nobody left at all. The old woman was staring at nothing. And then she'd pay for her thread and leave, and I'd stand there with a letter from Cheyenne in my apron pocket. And you burned it. I burned it, Mrs. Pell said. She never told me to. She's never told anybody to do anything in her whole life. That's the thing about her, Your Honor. I've been trying to say it for 11 years, and there's no way to say it. She doesn't do anything. She just stands next to you and says a true sentence, and then she leaves, and you do it. You do it yourself. And then it's yours forever, and she's got clean hands, honestly. And you can't ever tell a living soul, because the only crime in the room is the one you committed. Victoria Harrington did not move. That's why I never told, Mrs. Pell said. Not because I was frightened of her, because there's nothing to tell. There's a woman who bought thread. And Clara Bennett Whitmore turned around and looked at Victoria Harrington and said out loud in front of 400 people, I said it in your parlor in April, and you didn't hear me. Clean books don't mean you didn't do it, ma'am. It means you did it somewhere the books don't go. Victoria stood up. The room went absolutely rigid. Your Honor, she said, and her voice was as pleasant as it had been in Caleb's kitchen in March, I have not been named in a single count. I have not been called as a witness. I have been sitting in the third row of a civil dispute over $311, and I would ask the court's leave to go home. The judge looked at her for a long, long moment. Sit down, Mrs. Harrington, he said, and Victoria Harrington sat down. That was the moment. Caleb knew it, and Clara knew it, and every soul in that room knew it, and not one of them could have told you why. She sat down. That was all. 19 years, 11 ranches, $200,000, and a judge in a hot room told her to sit down, and she did it, and 400 people watched, and the spell broke like a plate hitting a floor. Randall Ambrose's lawyer withdrew the complaint at 2:40 in the afternoon. The judge would not take the withdrawal. He said a withdrawal left it lying there for people to pick up, and he said he had a distaste for that. And he dismissed it on the merits with prejudice and read out 11 dates from a bank ledger and 11 dates from a girl's daybook and had the clerk enter both. And then he said on the record that Clara Bennett Whitmore had left that courtroom without a stain of any kind, and he would say so to anyone who asked him for the rest of his life. Randall Ambrose was on the eastbound before dark and never set foot in the territory again. There was no case against Victoria Harrington. That was the part nobody in Red Hollow ever made peace with, and Clara made peace with it before anybody, which surprised even Caleb. She never mailed a letter, she said that night. She never burned one. She never wrote a word, never signed a thing, never told a soul to do anything. There's no statute against buying thread. So she walks. She walks, Clara said. Clara, Caleb, listen. She put her hand flat on the table. There was never a courthouse in this. I told you that in March. She was never frightened of a judge. She's got more lawyers than I've got dresses. What she's spent 19 years being frightened of is one person knowing one thing. Clara looked up. 400 people know it now. The federal men came for Mrs. Pell in August. She went with them without a word of argument, and she pleaded to all of it every count, and she gave them 11 years of it in a statement 40 pages long. And the strangest thing was that Clara wrote to her, every month. For 6 years until the old woman died in a state facility in Nebraska, and Caleb never once asked his wife why, and Clara never once explained it, and the only thing she ever said about it was at supper out of nowhere about a year in, nobody's coming for her either. And Caleb Whitmore said, no, and passed her the bread. And that was the whole of the conversation. Victoria Harrington sold out in the spring of '88. She wasn't ruined. That was the thing Caleb tried to explain to people for years afterward and never managed. Nobody took her money, and nobody indicted her, and nobody put a hand on her. What happened was smaller and worse. Daniel Ott stayed. He stayed in Red Hollow. He sold the freight business in Cheyenne and came back and bought 40 acres nobody wanted, and he made an absolute nuisance of himself for 11 months. He'd ride out to the Kessel place, which was Harrington's by then, run by a hired man, and sit on the fence and talk to whoever was there. He'd ride out to the Loomis flat. He'd go into the new store and sit on a barrel for 3 hours, saying nothing in particular to anybody who came in. What's he doing? Caleb asked that first winter. He's coming, Clara said. To what? To everybody, Clara said. That's all. He's just coming. He's the person who didn't come, and he's decided he's going to be him now, and he's going to do it every day until he dies. And Caleb—" She'd looked up from the ledger. "There is not one thing in this world she can do about it. Not one. It's not illegal. It's not written down. It doesn't leave a mark." Caleb had laughed out loud. "She can't fight it," he said. "She's never had to fight anything in her life," Clara said. "She waits. And you can't wait out a man who shows up." Victoria Harrington got $211,000 for the whole of it and went to San Francisco and lived another 19 years. And Caleb heard secondhand from a cattle buyer that she never once in all that time mentioned Wyoming to anybody. He believed it. They bought the Kessel place in '91 and the Loomis flat in '94, and Clara paid above the fair price both times because she said she'd be damned if anybody was ever going to say a Whitmore got a bargain off a broken family. The $9 a month stayed on the books for 41 years. It became the joke of the county. It got into the Sentinel twice. Clara Bennett Whitmore, who by 1902 was signing notes for a spread of 11,000 acres and had a seat on the bank board in Cheyenne that no other woman in the territory had ever been offered, drew $9 a month in wages in ink in her own hand, and never once let a bookkeeper round it up. "It's a foolishness," Caleb said one time near the end. "It's the whole thing," Clara said. "Clara, we've got—" "I know what we've got." She'd been 81 years old and still doing the books herself. "In November of '86, I had $4 and a dead man's coat, and I stood on your step, and you looked at me like a beggar, and I've spent every day since making certain that not one soul on God's earth, including you, Caleb, including you, could ever say I was given anything." She'd put the pencil down. $9 in a book, earned. That's not a foolishness. That's my father. They had 4 children. The second one was a girl, and they named her Jamasina, which was an ugly name, and everybody said so, and Clara did not care one particle, and by the time that girl was 9 years old, the whole valley called her Jimmy, and her father used to say she could throw hay like her mother and lie like a horse trader. And every winter when the first snow came down on the valley, Caleb Whitmore would go out to the gate. He never told anybody why. He did it for 41 years. He'd walk out to the gate and stand there in the cold with his hands in his pockets for about 10 minutes and then come back in, and his children thought he was checking the road, and his grandchildren thought he was daft, and only Clara ever knew, and Clara never asked, except once. It was 1927. He was 79, and he'd been out at that gate 11 minutes, and she was standing in the door with a lamp when he came back, and she said, "Caleb, 41 years. I know it. What are you looking for out there?" And Caleb Whitmore said, "I'm not looking, I'm listening." "For what?" "For a knock," he said. Clara didn't say anything. "Every year," Caleb said, "every year the first snow comes, and I go out there and I stand in it, and I think somewhere out there tonight there's somebody 11 miles from a door, and they've got $4 and a letter, and they've made up their mind that nobody's coming." He looked at her. "And I stand out there, and I think, well, somebody came for me." "Nobody came for you," Clara said. "I came for me." "Clara, I did?" she said. "I've never once said different. I came up your road because I ran out of road, and I've told you that from the first hour, and I'd tell it to God tomorrow." She stopped. Her voice did the thing it did about twice a decade. "And then you opened the door." "That's nothing. Anybody would have—" "Nobody did," Clara said. "That's the whole of it, Caleb. That's the entire ledger. 11 men and women in this valley in 19 years, and my father in Missouri, and Ott's boy in Cheyenne, and Mrs. Pell in Nebraska. Every one of them was standing outside a door, and nobody ever opened it." She was crying, and she was 81, and she wiped her face with the heel of her hand, the same as she had at 29. "You opened it. That's not nothing. That's the only thing that's ever been anything." He died in the March of 1931. She followed him in the November. The county put up a stone with both their names on it, and one line underneath, and the line was Clara's because she'd written it out herself 6 years before, and given it to the stonecutter with the money in advance, And it did not say beloved, and it did not say rest, and it did not say one word about God. It said they opened the door. And every winter still in that valley, when the first snow comes down, and the light goes on in a ranch house at the end of 11 miles of bad road, somebody in that house gets up and looks out. Because a woman walked up that road one night with $4 and a dead man's letter, and a man who had buried his own heart 8 years deep got out of his chair and unlatched the door. And that is the only thing either of them ever did that mattered, and it was enough, and it will be enough forever.